I got into streamer fishing so I could see him kill it. So for me, the appeal between nymphing and fishing leaded streamers is in the same church versus...
I just don't think they're as curious. I think the critique is in the dark now. It never used to be in the dark. There was never critique in the dark. Doing the winter tie down, and we're tying the Buck Rodgers Drunk Disorderly, which is a good pattern for, well, it works everywhere, but it's really good when the water's clear. Low water conditions, which also come with that often. Yeah, let's start spinning this. So we're gonna do materials first. First, we have our rear hook, which is a B10 Stinger S, size 4. We'll spin that up with some 75 or 100 GSB or standard denier will suffice. We're gonna take some flash guys, kind of a mild amount, but just long enough that we can take it off the tail. I would say usually the shank length and a half is what we want to come off the back, and there's a little pinch to this that'll help. So I'll give it 2 over the top just to give it a snug. Well, let's not be wasteful, so I'll come down there and I'll pull and I'll just snug that right there. You see how I got 2 wraps there holding? Take it right to the bend of the hook. I'm gonna move forward, clean that all up, and then back. Make sure you got a good thumb and index on that. Come around the back side, we're gonna give that little tie down fluff enhancer. Maybe 3 or 4 of those wraps right there. Nice little snug to make sure that's right behind. Get a little bump out of it, not much. We're gonna come back here again, shanked in a half for the standard, which is just longer than the mini. Both deadly, both cool. We're just doing the standard. Pattern designated behind the Dahlberg Diver and Rapellas that kick my ass way too often. The Dahlberg Diver, I think, is a genius fly. I think Larry Dahlberg is a genius. But the way it would dive but then recover with action was better than anything our jig stuff was doing. We had a lot of jig shit, you know. With a mix, which gives it a nice effect of 2, and we're going to marry both of those colors together. I usually pinch them. Try and work with the grain. If you look at that polar, it does have like a way. Try and go with it. And then take that right back to where the flash is or just before. I mean, you know, Krelex, the baseline of that, you know, is very flashy. So when everybody says, do you think you're using too much flash? I would say, look at some of the steelhead stuff that we're using. Never too much flash, maybe incorrect flash, but never too much. I mean, why does a MEP spinner work? I mean, that entire baseline is just flash and some vibration, of course. Sounds like a washing machine underwater. We're polymering and we're cleaning. If you guys look, I can kind of pet that stuff back and it blends real nice. Each one over the other. I usually cover about 2/3 of that shank coming up, and then I'll tie off. And be really careful. You don't want to be messy there. You want to use all those fibers. You don't want to be tying them down and getting extra bulk you don't need. Right down here on the base, make it clean. We gotta add some bunny to this. Not just bunny, super bunny. Okay, we're gonna pet that back. That's looking pretty special. Now remember, you gotta leave yourself plenty of room, so we don't wanna get over crazy with that whole tie down part of this too. We wanna leave ourselves enough room that we can, you know, get our bunny on there and all that stuff. And the thing I've always had about the Rapel is, you know, it is still artificial. It doesn't smell like a fish. It doesn't taste like one. Doesn't feel like one. I think the biggest sales pitch to it was the inconsistent random flash, which to a brown trout is a bite trigger that if you've ever seen a minnow or a fry or a par smolt get chased down, you can kind of see this fish really get into a panic or an inconsistency in its inability to run or swim away. And that flashing, that underside of the belly turning and yawing and trying to kind of outflank whatever fish that you were never really aware of until it hit the shallow, and keep watching it. And, you know, as you'd cover 40, 50 yards of river, you'd see one of those browns just come up and snipe one of those 8-10 inch little rainbow looking smolts. So yeah, that was always cool. Okay, so we're taking our bunny. This is a groovy strip. Bam. Depending on what you guys do, you guys are usually about 2.5 spins. These micros are about 4, just because they're micro and they're good for doing the tails and stuff. So same stuff, it's just a zonker, same size. I just didn't realize I grabbed the micro. You want to tie that down pretty close to the head because we don't need much space here for the flank that'll follow all this up. What I'll do is I'll get that semi-close. You guys can kind of see where I'm not really going to crowd that hook. And with my thread, if you guys do it just right, you can kind of clean up around that eye with the thread because it kind of mashes it down. It gives you a nice little plank there for the flank. How about that? Yeah, those Rapella guys. That black and gold number 13 has been kicking my ass for so long. I know how deadly it was. I used to use them when I was a kid. Brown Trout Kryptonite. That plug would basically just, if you look at it, the way it swims, it's always trying to right itself from almost rolling over. And what I've always said is that's the off equilibrium. That's the swim bladder in the fish that is now off as a result of it's not able to sustain its belly float. So it starts to kind of do this, right? And I think brown trout, whether or not they're feeding or not, you know, they see some triggers like that and they just, it's front and center. And they snap to, and they will make that an opportunity. But, you know, like I said, I don't know if I see a lot of difference between the rainbows and the brown trout as much as I do in their predator senses. Because when they're nymphing, they're very similar fish. You know, they're pecking away at the snack level. But as soon as you hit that, you know, kill button, I do see those brown trout shine a bit more. And then that pre-storm came in. The barrow did a low flat. We were unaware of it. I got up in the box and I made them look dumb for a little while, those buttery little bastards. And we got done with an hour of that, and I turned around and I said, that was a really fine round of brown trout fishing, considering we're in the middle of January, fishing swim flies, high action, high speed, and still getting them to blow up, rip the rod out of our hand. But that low flat, that pre-bite is that precursor to the rain. The rain means the water's going to rise. The rise comes to burning calories. Burning calories means that they want to get in front of that by feeding before the water gets really muddy and they have to, you know, it's like hunting with Ray Charles down there for them. You know? I can't see as much. And we're going to take a flank. We want this to cover all but just a pinch of that flash. Just a pinch. We're talking not even a half an inch. I want that just kind of peeking out the rear there. So it's like kind of looking under the skirt when this rolls over. We want an underside to our pattern here. We don't want just a hemisphere of color. We want this ability for a fish to idealize that is the top and that is the bottom of that prey. Because if you've noticed, any minnow or fish prey that we're following usually has a dark back and a lighter belly, typically. And if we kind of cater to that idea, when that rolls over or moves, it gives the predator a sense of that bait or fly's movement and lets them set up that head take, because they can't swallow them backwards. It'll kill them. Okay, after you guys get your flanks good and secure, that is good and secure. Those are some pretty tight squeezes on there. I don't mind a couple of spins on that bottom just so you can ensure that you're getting a good pull on this. And double whip finish usually covers it. You guys can glue them if you'd like. Mine are usually in a tree, too short a time to really. The knots I've never had one fail. Double whip finish with a several wrap there. Pretty evil, especially when you're giving them some good tugs. There you go. Kind of clean that off. There we go. Reel bite wire, very cool stuff. Use it on my swing flies as well. Very nice. You can thread that up. You guys can get your bead on there, and that can just sit. I will tell you the swim fly stuff does walk a kind of a different path, kind of more, you know, more of a walk with the fly line versus, you know, direct contact with the fly, which is a huge difference between the two. when we fish that lead, we have to have a contact, a directness. You know, you can fish a wave in the line, but it's pretty dulled. I'd say by the time it gets to the bug, a full jig always works good on lead just because it has a proper fall. Guys, when you guys spin this wire into place, we'll place it along the inner side, that is your side. I'd say 3 or 4 wraps and then get that thing centered where you want. Do be sure that your wires are on the correct entry through the bead so that you don't have a twist in the stinger hook. The stinger hook should be kind of planing off the back, very perfect. Lateral movement, kind of like a cougar on the rear, whereas we're building a whole ruddered wedge system on the front. Watershed dependent. You know, on the bigger watersheds, I'm a huge fan of the two-handed approach just because I can cover more water. The fish have much more time to kind of sort out the plan of attack. When you're pocket fishing, even when I'm crick fishing some of this stuff, you know, these smaller D's, I'm using them in, you know, very, very tight water sometimes where it's 8 foot. You're using a sink tip, really tiny stuff. And if you get really good at, you know, fishing in that kind of corridor, I mean, you can really see the brown trout be all he can be because they're just not messed with up there. They're not. Just get into some of the do's and don'ts about the different structured water based on the speed, the angle you'd approach it, whether or not it's like a mid-river structure, down an improvement, a bank undercut. There's just so many variables in the small water. I mean, I've been known to even two-hand some small water before just to get a prescribed response in a certain area. So a lot of times I think it's the spot, whether you're on a tailwater or, you know, the smaller waters. There's always that kind of look at the water and says it needs that cast, that presentation, not so much from our point of view, but from where you think they might be looking, from their point of view. And if you look at it from that, you're going to come up with a far more answers than our point of view. Because if you're always looking at this from the, you know, our point of view down at the fly, you're missing the idea of selling these flies in their entirety. Yeah, down swats, lift wiggles, straight strips, walk the dog, grubbing. I mean, in the same respect that we are using different presentation methods based on the watershed. And again, the style of drunk or blade runner that we're implementing is basically based on the watershed. And therefore, we do have different lines that cater to it. You know, I'm going to still say it. The surf airflow, which is discontinued, is the finest overall sink tip up with a type 5, 26.5 foot head. Mild triangle with a handler that is definitely capable but not overdone. I will also say in that same breath that a Streamer Max Short is the finest roll casting, tight water, learning sink tip apparatus that has ever been made, only because the handler compensates for a shortened amount of lead, which allows for nobody to have to use extreme amounts of the head to achieve some of that load awareness. Now, as you progress as an angler, you do see that the Max Short is also limited in its presentation because it does have a sincere water drag with that big handler, which helps in tight quarter. If you're pocket fishing, I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. I do believe that if the water gets to a certain low and clear status, though, that pocket turns into almost 3 different pockets. This going into this realm of swim that we're doing now with reintroducing sink tips at different angles during the same cast after an interval of finish. Like we'll finish one presentation, and instead of recasting, identifying where the fish are, or at least the idea of where the fish are, and then showing them a directly opposite or bilateral movement to what we, just because we assume that they're noticing these flies at 6 to 10 feet away. If that's true, which it is, unlike dirty water, which is the best streamer bite window because they're forced to react to a fly coming into a 3-foot window of visibility. With clear water, we lose that, which is why we go to the two-handed approaches, which is speed. And speed takes away some of that critique. It allows them less time to negotiate that thought of, should I? Oh, that doesn't look right. With two-handed fly, they have to make that distinction in a second and a half, set it up, and kill it. Yep. Also, with this re-swim stuff that we're using the sink tips, and there again, getting back to just the longer sink tips.
your ability to not only have a longer 30-foot head, but then again, a head that has a handler that would allow you to make such a pitch, in which case I'm drawing upstream or just across and upstream, walking the dog, here, there, and I'm getting close to a finish. And I'm obviously, 10, 15 away from the rod tip, but the game's already up because the water's clear and you've run out of real estate to sell. So instead of going through the whole routine of smashing up the water with a set cast and all that stuff, and you already know you're still in the good water, we'll do a reset down at a 45, allow a huge amount of slack to either draw downstream or upstream, let it gain traction, and watch that bug do some weird 8S out, funky over to the other side of the hole and then back on just a few lift wiggle actions. The same fish, noticing all of these things at such distance in clear water. Ooh, you're getting into a realm of streamer fishing that no longer has a direct line between you and the bank. Now you're walking, you're on a different path. You're on a different path. You're selling flies at multiple angles on one cast. Those White River fish in Arkansas, remember that? The first few years we were going there, you could knock the cover off the ball, get a 24 every time you made a pass. Each boat, if you didn't get that 2-4, we felt like either there was some terrible bite window or we were just doing something wrong. Fishing was that good. As a few 4 years, 5 years kind of progressed, you could see a slip in that day bite. Make sure you've got a good sized teardrop there for movement. See that? There's a nice little teardrop back there, and you're going to come back and you're going to lock that down. And you want to maximize your shank on the forward, guys, so I can't stress enough. You tie this thing all the way back to the hook, right to before it tips over, because that'll give you more shank to actually get that fourth pencil of deer. Everybody, when they're tying these the first time, always struggles on the pencil of the deer on the front. Deer is the hard part of this, so this is the easy part.
How far do you go forward with the wire, with your thread?
I'll usually do that to basically where I would think I'd wrap off on that head. So I'm usually about 2/3 again. Okay. You know what I mean? Because I still have to get a couple of collars of bunny, a flash, and 2 flags. This after the polar chenille midriff. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna get this 2/3 point here. And, if you look here with the wire and the stuff, what I'm doing is I'm kind of looking, okay, so I'm going to need 4 pencils. I'm going to need this. So that's about where I'll do my little turnover. And if you do this just right, it makes this neat little cradle for the rattle. So if you go down the other side and you keep both ends on kind of top, get your wire cutters, little snips. Don't use your scissors. You'll go through them like paper. So you got your little rattle cradle there. We're going to tiptoe in. And that rear one gets some good snugging. So that teardrop is locked and you don't have any movement. There you go. We're going to go back to the flash. This stage of flash should be about the same or just more than the one before. So we're trying to build up, as you know, any good fish tends to get just a wee bit larger as it moves forward. Tapering up to the big part of the head, which my argument with all the added materials behind fly heads these days, where they're trying to add mass, and they are mistaking mass for signature. And I've always said that you don't really need a lot of mass. All you need is a signature, because the head of any bait fish is the only thing those fish really feel moving around, as it is the largest point on that fish. It's the one that leaves the punch through the water. Everything behind that larger head is cavitation and kind of moot behind it. So this palmer is a little bit different than the first one, because on this one, what we're trying to do is not palmer forward so much as just palmer a few right on top of each other, so that we can cover the bridge. And we're also building up the body. So that's my 1/3.5 with this micro. You guys should probably be about 2 wraps. And then you come under it for the lockdown.
They're kind of more on top of each other than they are.
They are. That's why we're building that shoulder. So you're not building forward. You're not wrapping this zonker forward so much as on top of itself. We're going to tie that down. And as best you can, you want to go back there and find that shoulder with your thread.
See, if you look here, I'm gonna keep tying back here until that shoulder pops. And that really makes that bunny do much. Yeah, that's the bunny we know and love right there. What we're trying to do here is just make enough material to kind of insinuate there's body here without throwing a whole bunch of mass into it. So the polar chenille just bumps through the water, and we've got 2 shoulders of the bunny, and then we've got chicken and chicken rolls. And then you can grab your same polar chenille, doubled up. It should be ready to go. When you're on like drunk number 75 for the month, you'll stab yourself with that stinger at least 6-8 times. Oh no, your thumb starts looking like Swiss cheese. Bam. Did I do that right? There we go.
So are you wrapping around the base on
You're-
the shank?
Yeah, you wrap around the base. After you go down, you wrap underneath the knuckle of that in a little angle. It kind of pinches everything down. I'll do 4 or 5 up in there just to clean it all up, just to make sure there's a good rock on that. Some guys will put glue on it. I've done that. It's taken me a few years to really dial it all in. Myself, I still prefer the Gamma long shank 4X long. Hell, I'd like it if they did a 5 or a 6. The reason being is, I'm sorry, I went back that twice without coming back once. Sorry about that. The reason being, I really like the X long versus the jigs, and the jigs have their moment. It's just that longer shank has a longer kick point off the wedge, so it throws the hook more, which in turn throws the rear hook more. The shorter the hook gets. Now, you could start talking about lengthening the jig shank behind the actual degree bend, and that would start kind of getting pretty cool, because now you'd be lengthening out. It's like a handgun versus a rifle. You get that longer action plus that down wedge dig. It's a really good recovery action. Anytime you get 5 pencils on top of a hook, you're going to get a lot of cool float recovery on them. So rattle good and tied in, and we're going to take and do the same thing. You should be able to get about 2.5 wraps before you get to the rattle. That's usually how it works out. There we go. If you do that just right, that last hook should get you just underneath the corner of that rattle. It sits in there pretty good, kind of locks in and gives that rattle a little cushion. With this rattle, we like to cover it for a couple of reasons. Everybody asks me why I like the rattle. Do I think the rattle matters? Do I think the rattle sells? So at a distance, I don't think this rattle means anything but profile. And really the biggest reason I'm using the rattle is for profile. It is not for the sound. I mean, if I'm trying to get the effect of a thunder stick by putting in a glass bead, I think I'm falling way short here. This is for profile. And that profile, what it does is, again, goes back to that theme of a fish gets bigger or generally larger as it moves to its forward third. Snip that, nice and clean. And we do want to back this thing all the way up to that rattle, and there's a reason. We need to use that rattle like a shoulder. Half the magic of the collar on this bug, the way the bunny is kind of situated, is by having that rattle semi-exposed. Before we get into the flanks, I wouldn't mind having you guys take your materials and mohawk a top and bottom so that the bulk of your polar is just back and up and down. We're trying to build the forward rudder of this bug. So we'll want to have these flanks in on either side and also not messing with it. We have our polar chenille. We're going to take our flanks. Now, guys, when you get these flanks, there should be, when you go through a good bag of them, when they're all the bads. The good one is always that center line for the rear, for that kind of cougary top. And then on the sides here, we need 2 flanks that are kind of opposite, so that there's less on the bottom and more on the top, and they should be opposite so that they fit on either side. At the ends of these things, so that you can use and maximize the flank, pull the little spikes off the end, those little extra long ones, because we don't want those getting in the way of that hook back there. So we lay this in such a way that it covers the bridge of the drunk there going into that second hook, and that's it. So we're going to peel back right about here. We're just going to de-feather that up into the forward. Make sure your puller chenille stays out of this or it'll make it a mess on that forward. Make about 4 wraps. Make sure it's right where you want it. A little tug if you need to. And then you're going to snug that right down to that glass bead again. And then back forward. You should use your scissors for that maneuver. Just crossing that rear hook. See that? See where it kind of comes back in there? Because you don't want to start hindering that rear hook. That is on the wrong side for me to be giving directions. So you can see I've cleaned that shaft. And I'm coming over here. And with this one, you can do it on the other one, as you see. But you'll line it up with that one, bring it right beside, and then tie down again. Sometimes moving that little stem right there will kind of level out that flank just right so it comes right down the side of that bug and builds that rudder. What we're trying to do is make a rudder here. Behind the head of that wedge, we're trying to make a secondary little knifing effect. And that's when this material is leveled and lean that goes back into that kind of sway rear. We're going to take that same amount of flash that we've been kind of focused on. We're going to come right up here. We don't want this all the way around the hook, guys. We want it in the top hemisphere. So that every time that this wedge cracks a different whip off of an action given by us, it'll tip and flash to them on the underside. That's the goal, is to tip and flash. From our point of view, we see a lot. From their point of view, they see it when it tips and kind of kicks. And that's what kind of sets them into that injury, that inconsistency, that drunk nature of the walk of the bug. Leader design. Okay, so this goes back to tailwater versus small water. The rollover that you have when you're using like a roll cast style fly, or a roll cast size fly, I should say, something like this, is that your ability to kind of roll it over off of that cast versus a back cast where you're using a much further cast. So 25 versus 75 is usually the difference between the mid-small water game and then big tailwater game. Big tailwater game, you really want to limit that amount of diameter of tippet or leader around the forward of the fly. So that on a tailwater, because you're back casting and not roll casting, is far longer than it would be if you're in the smaller water. So like on the small water, the entire leader might be, for a swim fly, again, longer than a leaded. Like if I'm fishing lead, I'll fish 3 or 4 feet. You don't need much more because you're looking for that contact. You don't want that baggage in the leader. But when you're fishing these, you really do want low amounts of current and bow tension. And the only way to relax that is in diameter. We don't want the bottom with swim flies. We want the middle part of the column, maybe just below the middle part of the column on a sunny day. But if a fish is willing to travel 2 yards to hit a streamer, there's no reason it wouldn't come up 2 yards to get a streamer. And I'm not fishing that deep. So whether you're using a deceiver, a drunk, anything that is unweighted, that is relying on its own swim out, that is to say 4 ways to year 1 versus just 1 to year 1, which is a fall on a jig. When you're fishing that swim and you want to get that max movement out of it, there has to be an amount of slack awarded per strip, which is, like I say, don't leave your rod tip in the water when you strip, because then you can never get a slack from the tip of the water or the tip of the rod down to the water. You need that slack. That slack is what allows the bug to swim out. Without the swim out, you're just pulling color and hoping. And that's not going to be enough anymore. But I got into streamer fishing so I could see him kill it. So for me, the appeal between nymphing and fishing leaded streamers is in the same church versus seeing a fish come up behind and give chase for several yards while you tease them into that mistake. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. That's better than getting a nibble or getting a stop. I see a lot of guys that go out there and they're switching so many tactics and never gaining confidence in any of them. None of them. They just go out there and they open the box every 10 minutes, chug a beer, turn the radio station, and that's a lot of cast waste. You could be casting, and really that's what it is. It's quarters in a slot machine, because there's nobody lucky, there's nobody better than the next guy, and there's the only really standouts that I've seen in this. The only measure there is the time you have into it. The more you do it, the better you get at it. There's no real shortcuts, because when you go into this idea that I'm going to give you this prerequisite,
primer, status quo, this will work in any streamer cast. There isn't. It's your ability to not only read the water, but read the bottom of the damn river and say, if I were a trout, I wouldn't just sit there. I'd sit there because. And we're fishing on the white. And you know me, I got to fish this stupid drunk all the time. So I'm fishing my drunk. And Brock pulls out this Buck Rodgers, like weird wool-headed, I think it was deceiver. I think it was the color more than anything.
How many wraps of this are you doing?
So the collar here should be 2, just because we need the bump. So it's 2 of this on top of each other. You're not wrapping down. Brock pulls out this kind of like poopy olive brownie red deceiver. Who knows what it was? Anyways, Blake puts this thing on. We make 2 or 3 passes. I think it was through Wildcat. And, you know, the first pass, Blake's like, I think he was like 3 to my 1 on passes. You know, and Blake's a good fisherman, but, you know, I like to think that I, you know, do it for a living. So I felt a little shorted. So we go through again. Blake's 3 to my 0 on this Buck Rodgers pattern. So I'm like, give me that pattern. And so we pull it out of the water. I'm just studying the wheels out of it. And I go back and I tie a couple of them up. And sure as shit, that Buck Rodgers combo must really hit the nerve on the sculpin end of things, because Brock was onto something there. And he said it was some old. It was old. It was like an old Montana. I don't think it was Montana. It was some fly company that used to do it years ago. Anyways, the color scheme was sound, though. The olive over white, dirty, and that's where all these browns, we get a lot more brown as we get into this head and stuff. So here we go with that second Palmer, just to add a little bit of.
Oh, this is a different color?
This is that gold variant or natural variant, whatever, just to make it look, kind of offset that really loud whine.
Gosh, I feel like I'm crowding the head now.
Don't crowd the head. You got to save. Save for the head. Save for the head. Double up one more time. On the minis, you guys can do single wraps of these, just because that hook houses a shoulder at far less. And that's, you know, a lot of guys will ask me, why don't I use a dubbing loop here? The dubbing loop doesn't give you that shoulder that the Zonker Palmer on top of itself does. You guys can kind of already see where that shoulder comes from when we're doing these heads. It's all about that bunny there. If you get the bunny right, you've got more than enough shoulder to give you that really bling bling collar. So there you go. You got your body built. First collar here. Kind of a lot going on. We're getting into the thing. You should use your hair scissors here. I'm lazy. And we're going to do a little pinch here to kind of clean it out. What you do is you pinch these guards, and you want to get these cut right at the base of these deer body furs. This is a good pinch. Every one of these guys should be a pencil. But if you guys wanted to make the first one, the collar, just a little bit bigger and then kind of compensate as you go, that's okay to do too. And if you guys only can get 2 or 3 spins of deer, don't go for 3 and 4. You know what I mean? And like I said, clean, comb that deer, get all that cotton out of there. You will thank yourself when you try and actually spin and manipulate this stuff.
Oh, you got a stacker right there.
You know, this first stack, by the way, is kind of somewhere between like spinning and stacking for like an elk hair caddis. So you're trying to kind of keep most of this material, especially in the guard end of this, in the very, very top half, because we want a collar. We don't need a collar underneath this fly. The whole idea of this wedge is to have almost no float recovery from the underside of that shank. We want this to go drunk and very disorderly and then recover very correctly. And in order to create those 0 spin drunks, we want to make sure we get good clean spin so that when we shave it down to just shy of a chin, what we want to do is we want to take those guards from that deer stacked and nice and level right to where you can kind of see that that first spin of bunny there. We want to be able, and it's not going to be there when we spin, but we'll go 1, 2, and then you'll give that a very good snug. It gets a spin on that forward kind of quarter there, and then go in there for 3. That's okay. 3, 4, and now you got a good primer to kind of finish off 7, 8, 9.
You got a good lock there, right?
Are you letting it? You're letting it spin though.
After that first 3-4, you got a good lock to go ahead and kind of go in there and just spin it through that. You know what I mean? But again, by the time the smoke clears, we want all that guard in the top half. We don't really care about the other end.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to come in here with my thumb now. And this is a big one. This really works good. Before the packer, you're going to take this. That was the wrong maneuver. So we're going to take and we're going to go roundabout. And we're just going to make sure that we've got all of our coverage just right. We're going to look at our guards here. Okay, that's about halfway around. Ooh, that one's not quite halfway around. So before I lock this all down, I want to make sure that those guards are right because I want them all on top. There we go. We got our nice little spread there. We can see all of our guards. They should be in the top part there. It doesn't really matter about the other end because that's just going to be for the body that we're going to be spinning off now, okay? Okay, we're looking pretty good here. So when we go to lock this down now, I want you to go in there with your packer, which is Dano's giving us here, well, 1884 Packers. We're going to go up in there and we're going to give that a good push. A good push. We want that right up there on that shoulder. And then we're going to take our thumb again, and we're going to push and make sure that we're maximizing the amount of stem that we still have to use. We're going to go in there and make sure all of those hairs are out the way. One good pinch, go right up in there and lock this down. Now you can take your mix color here. And I always like the bars. It just gives a little mild modeling while you're doing it. Plus it gives you an idea of the spread. Makes them look kind of fancy. Okay, we're going to go in here for number 2. These get easier because you don't need to stack them, so you can just go in there and, you know.
Oh, you don't need to stack.
You don't need to stack them. You can just clean them, and then, you know what I mean, lay them up in there because you're just using this for body. You can fully spin these now because we need these for underside material. Because if you think about it drunk, I mean, it looks just, the body style is very, very sculpting. Very sculpting. And for that to have that color, we've turned that Buck Rodgers into its kind of own thing here on just about every fishery that we fish for browns now. This thing has its moment. And I think it's just that sculpting stuff. And then once we get that 4th in there, make sure you're cleaning that cotton too. You just can't know how much that gets in the way of a good spin. That stuff will just get wrapped up the first time you go through it. So here we go. I didn't do so bad. I haven't tied one of these things in a couple of months. This is where it really matters though. The head, the cut. So we've got our 4 pencils in.
It's not quite.
Trying to maximize all of that material and spin. Every once in a while, it's no bad thing to give that GSP. This stuff is so tough that you can cinch down and lock a lot of these, you know, things that you're doing. Once you guys get as many pencils as you're going to get into those, yeah, don't crowd the head. We want to make sure if it's one less, you go ahead. And we'll just go ahead and it's the best way to whip finish these guys. I know it's kind of tricky. I've seen some plastic stuff used, but if you hold that top and then come underneath, that angle really helps to kind of grab that whip finish. So you kind of right up in there and then you start wrapping. And I do like a strong whip finish. Double whip finish cleaned off. We have the body and the head built. We are starting with the top, not the bottom. The bottom comes after the top. So we make sure our vise is level. I don't mind doing this with my vise all the time. I just kind of make sure my nice, pretty regal. See how it's got that little square? It's almost like they were thinking of me. It tells me when I'm level here with my hand. And I'll take right up to the eye here. And there's a lot of ways you guys can cut this. You guys can do it very slowly. But I will tell you, the slower you do, the more razor blades you go through. So you want to get this down to, 5-10 minutes for the whole head. So be generous in that wedge idea without losing all your material, because you can't go back unless you shave it all off with a razor blade, and that sucks. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start really low, and we're just going to push that back, right all the way back to those guards. See that? Got a little bold and break, come right in there again. Just take some more off. And make sure that you don't cut your guards. Your guards are supposed to be there. You spent some time stacking them, might as well have them. So we're going to keep going in there. We're right up to the guards. You guys can kind of hook with your razor off to the sides here a little. See how I'm kind of cupping around? Even off the tip, right off the end of the fly, you guys can come around and just kind of clean that wedge so it's easy. You're starting to see those stripes in the deer kind of popping up. And once you guys get yourself a basic, top flat, we don't want to finish it just yet on the top. We're just getting that platform. And then we can flip this bad, without the Way Cool flash. We're going to flip that bad boy upside down with that Way Cool Regal Vise.
Give us a top shot there for what you just
I'm
done.
sorry?
Let's see.
How's
how you
that?
did it.
How's that?
Okay. Wow.
See that?
That's crazy.
So we're getting our top right kind of dialed off there. Then our bottom. And the same thing here, only even still more. See how I'm level with that teardrop? I'm just going to push it back. And you can, and like I said, with this bottom, we don't need a lot of this material. So you guys can go ahead and almost remove that chin in its entirety. The only thing we don't want to see is the thread. As soon as we get to the thread, we know we're pushing the envelope here. As you guys get into your sides, you guys will see that that wedge is starting to take shape except for the sides. And guys, watch this little side because you should have a nice little pancake here. See this? Got that nice little pancake? Okay, sides.
Same.
See this? Right up that side. And it almost tells you where it wants to be cut. If you look in there, there's a point where it gets really thick just before those things kind of span out. You can go right up that line. See that? Just boom. We're going to flip it. We're going to do the same thing. Now we're going to finish the sculpt, and we always start with the chin because we need that baseline really flat on the bottom. So you grab that hook, turn that bug upside down, and you start kind of using that razor in such a way that you're turning away all of that excess material that you had under the chin. Because we don't want any of it. Every once in a while, just kind of pick your head up and look right down that hook eye. It'll kind of tell you where you're heading. And I'll show you that maneuver right there. See how you kind of look right down that thing, just like the eye of a little rifle there. You're kind of looking to make sure everything's looking boxy square. Come up here, clean up those whiskers on your guy. Taper off the sides, get them. And like I said, when you know you're getting into that right spot, you'll see your deer hair get solid. It'll stop being all spiky and funky. Again, the big trick here is just knowing where not to cut and how much to cut. Because what we're trying to do here is build something that, yes, has float recovery, but you can see that in the guard hairs that we've made here, that these guard hairs kind of promote for that float recovery outside of this wedge that we're carving up out of the deer. So no matter what, even if we didn't have the wedge, you'd still have that float recovery from the collar. So this wedge head's only job is to start cutting water. And I mean digging. And, a lot of times when we're casting these things, especially roll casting, you'll go to get a good roll cast out the water. And I've noticed as the heads on these flies have gotten a little bit more defined in the cut, that you'll go to roll cast it with more than enough D-loop tension. And the bug will just Velcro right to the surface of the water, just like somebody's got split shot attached to that thing. And I used to just get mad thinking that I was making a bad cast or improperly timed. And then I realized it wasn't me at all. It was the dig of the bug's head. It would plant around, and that wedge would be planted in such a way that when I would go to depress the cast, it would simply stick to that surface because it didn't want to come out the water. The wedge would keep it down. Take your scissors, give yourself a nice barber shop there, because you don't want to have anything but guard hairs. Ooh, we're getting close now. and a wedge. We want swim, swim, dig, dig, chuck and jive. And again, that underside can be vacant of any real material, save just the color of that deer coverage on the bottom. That should cover that. You don't really need to get into the... But I will say having a rudder behind a wedge is far better than not. And I like how every one of the actions on this bug is fighting for kind of the drivetrain of the bug here. That works. That makes them walk. That makes them fight. And it keeps a brown trout guessing. If they can read that next movement, it's not nearly as cool as the injury movement, which could never be read. Here's your kind of... Where am I? Where? Oh, it's going that way.
Yeah,
Nice.
right there.
See that? You got that little wedge and you're kicking and okay. So we've got our wedge, deer wedge cut. You can kind of see, I think that kind of puts it right about yay. Yeah, again, you know what I think is really neat? The weight. There's nothing here. There's nothing here. I mean, you wonder why those things feel, I mean, it's nice when you're going for long casts, when you know that no matter what, the fly line sink tip grainage overpowers the bug immediately. That always makes it so much easier to cast a bug. We're going to take a couple of any sticky eyes we'll do here.
Pretty much it.
I actually remembered mine to stick them on my UV lamp, which was pretty cool. Anybody notice that? That's right. And you're going to take some of your super glue
So just make this
and do the best you can, guys, at kind of getting that deer, or not the deer, but the bunny out the way, because it does want to kind of get in the way when you're doing this. So just a little dab, about 2/3 the way back from the tip of the hook. Just a little dot will do. And we're going to take the eyes. And just dot them on there. Be very careful there. You get that on your fingers and it starts getting pretty interesting. Kind of push it down. I'm usually holding for about 10 seconds or so, just to give it a nice lock there. There we go. A little bit more there. And I think I'm just going to use... This will do. And take and move a little bit of this stuff over here on this side. And you want to get this to the far reaches of that square without getting it into your guard hairs. You don't want your guard hairs with this stuff on it. It'll kind of make them crimpy and chalk them out ugly. And get that on the underside as well. You're not trying to waterproof this bug, because no matter what, the stuff is going to come, the water will eventually kind of come in through the back head of the fly. What you're trying to do is add a durability to the wedge so that as you're beating the banks, the structures, rubs onto the bottom, you know, gravel, logs, the occasional boat or anchor hit. You're trying to give the head some, yeah, right. You're trying to give this head some ability to, you know, retain its coolness. So, Solera is in check. UV lamp zapping. There we go. I'm usually about 15 seconds on either side. If you have any of those loose hairs that aren't guards that are still in that collar, you can pull those out. But you've got a pretty, you know, that's a pretty durable fly. These things will last quite some time in the box. So it's really nice having these new connection wires that won't rust too. That's a lot better. Oh, also, be sure not to crowd the eye with your glue before you set with that UV, because that stuff's kind of, you know, it's meant to be pretty forever, like a head cement. So, got a nice little sheen on it. You can probably see what you need to. But again, we've got many actions here working against one. Flat, dig, side rudder, rear flanking flap. With a triple, there's a tail that gets a rear knife rudder, so you get more of a swim versus this being kind of more of that kind of broke back rapella, jointed rapella. This has got more of a shimmy shake than it does a swim or a bait fish recovery, a banjo minnow swim, if you will.